Our guest today is Isom. She's the Director of Institutional Messaging for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And she has previously worked in Utah State government with Governor Herbert as a Deputy Chief of Staff and Communications Director. She's worked for a state agency and has some experience running political campaigns. I like this part on the bio that says she started in politics by running political campaigns between babies and also served as a city council member. She's a BYU graduate. Years ago we took public opinion and voting behavior at the same time, and I do remember Allie in part because she used to bring, I guess it was your first child, to class on rare occasions. I do remember once, though, that this was a kid that woke up. And anyway, you handled it with style. And so she has a knack for juggling lots of things and has done so admirably. Anyway, I think she has lots of stuff to share with us. And so without further ado, please welcome Allie Isom.
And here I thought I was so stealth, sneaking that baby in. Maybe not so much. It's really a treat to be with you today. It's great to see some familiar faces, too, with us. And my husband, Eric, my Idaho farm boy, political science 110 interface, we're a total BYU cliche. I'm reluctantly a BYU cliche, but glad to be back. So this is an interesting opportunity. They provided me a template, and I'm going to walk you through some of the concepts that they asked me to talk about. But what I'm hoping to do is share with you an array of my experiences and decision points, and then also a witness of Heavenly Father's engagement in our lives and in our professional and personal interests. And so the last time I was here, I was speaking as the governor's spokesperson and deputy chief of staff. I'm in a very different place now in my career, working for the LDS Church. So when I was asked to describe what I do and talk about my industry, I kept thinking, I'm not really sure what my industry is, but let me give you kind of a summary of what I've done, and that will maybe illustrate for you a little bit of career learning. It's not an isolated industry. I've worked in public policy and public affairs, in strategic communication and in organizational and management strategy, and I've worked in stakeholder engagement and coalition building. So those are sort of the areas in which I've engaged, and my career path, as Dr. Monson already explained, I started by running local and statewide campaigns for Republicans primarily, and learned so much, and that gave me flexibility and opportunity to stay networked and a chance to use my skill set. I found myself using my communications minor so much more than my political science major, but my sweet spot in my studies was really election analysis and campaign management and stakeholder engagement and special interests. And the governor's office ended up being a convergence of all of those skill sets. So let me take you between those two spots. So from campaigns, I did some lobbying, and I worked for state agencies. I was the deputy director at the Department of what was then called Community and Culture. We had the state's cultural entities and arts and history in the state library, which has the largest Braille collection in the world. But we also had housing and community development at that time, and other programs, Indian affairs and ethnic affairs that were more of ethnic outreach in the community. And then I moved to workforce services, which was the polar opposite of community and culture. And in workforce services, I was government affairs director, and hired primarily because they were under legislative scrutiny at that time. And they were having an in-depth budget review in tandem with a legislative budget audit, which is lots of fun for a state agency that's incredibly complex and itself has $1 billion budget. And the first day I was there, I sat through a few meetings, and at the end of the day, somebody came in and said, how'd it go? And I said, this is fascinating, but I know you all were speaking English. I have absolutely no idea what was said in those meetings. It was acronym after acronym after acronym. I said, could I get a guide to the acronyms for DWS? And the next day, somebody shows up, and I'm not kidding you, 16 single-spaced pages of acronyms to learn. I said, well, this might be our first problem. So I found myself being primary translator for DWS and helping legislators in bite-sized chunks start to understand what DWS did with workforce development and unemployment insurance and a number of entitlement programs. From there, the governor tapped me to become his deputy chief of staff and communications director, and it was because when I had graduated from BYU, Bud Scruggs, who was a professor of mine, was asked by Gary Herbert to send him a student or somebody to help run a campaign. He was thinking about running for Congress. And so a very pregnant Allie Isom shows up. And I'm sure Gary was thinking, he sent me a pregnant girl. And he asked me to take notes at the meeting. And I said, I'm not here to take notes. I'm here to help you win. And that really defined my relationship with Gary Herbert. Just talk to the man straight. And it was a brief congressional race. He actually, in the end, decided not to pursue the campaign, and he withdrew before the convention was held that year. And that was the year Chris Cannon was elected, and he ran for county commission instead. So then my husband and I helped him with a couple county commission races, and that's how we ended up being connected. And 20 years later, he asks me to be his communications director. And I giggled because he asked me, he'd already offered me the job, and then he said, by the way, do you know how to write a press release? Fortunately, I did. I knew how to do that. So I went from the governor's office to LDS Public Affairs. And that's a story I'm going to tell you in a little bit. But from Public Affairs, where I was the director of family and community relations, I did a lot of community outreach and partner engagement, and worked on a couple of special fronts, including I worked on women's issues, and I was the lead on the design of mormonandgay.lds.org, which was sacred ground for me, a very special project. And from Public Affairs, now I'm the director of institutional messaging for the communication services, which is more of an enterprise communications role. So it's a new horizon for me. I started this role in January, and my primary responsibilities now are to help church leaders determine a strategy for communicating with the planet. How do we as a global faith act and behave and sound and look and feel like a global faith? So I just returned from a research trip to India, and we're doing a number of in-depth research projects to learn more about global audiences and their beliefs and faiths and value and spirituality. Yes? Are you raising your hand? Okay, sorry. Okay. So let me talk about the governor's office, because I think that might have the most relevance to this particular group of students. It was the convergence of my policy training and politics and communications. And there were some people who would have even called it my dream job. Every day was different. There were very long days. We, in fact, had a couple of family councils before I accepted the role, because previously in state agencies, I had negotiated a part-time arrangement so that I could be home when school got out and my kids got home from school. And I was full-time during the legislative session, which is about 6 weeks in the state of Utah, and then I was part-time the rest of the year, working about 25 to 30 hours a week, which was perfect life balance for me. But when I jumped to the governor's office, it was more like 16 to 18-hour days and very consuming. And fortunately, he's a man of faith, and I knew at least Sundays I was going to get relief and a break. But they were long days and long hours, and our family committed jointly that this would be an endeavor in which we'd all be engaged. And my husband picked up the carpool and the laundry and grocery shopping, and having somebody who's pretty OCD about laundry is a fantastic thing. He's retained that duty at our house. Couldn't do it without his complete support and encouragement, especially those long days when he understood what it meant that the governor's budget or a legislative issue or whatever had popped. He understood that I needed to be on deck. I was also a media interface there. I was responsible for all of our public statements, our public events. I was the policy lead on senior staff and on specific issues, and I was a liaison to specific legislators as well. I did strategic planning for several issues like gun legislation, a sex ed bill, a Snake Valley water agreement with Nevada, judicial nominations, budget, wildfires, windstorms. The National Governors Association came into town, and China decided to send 5 Chinese governors and a bunch of Chinese media. That was a fascinating exercise in cultural diplomacy, because you think American media are aggressive, but Chinese media are pretty much propagandists, and they will stop at nothing to make their guy look good. So rules and protocols and just sheer good manners to go out the door with them. It was fascinating. But my biggest takeaway working for the governor's office was a framework that I came to rely on. And I wanted to share this with you because I think it's so important in how you think about problem solving. In those kind of arenas, it's so easy for political considerations to start to eclipse other things. And you're often saying, what's the right thing to do? It's easy to say what's, if you have an agenda, something's right, but truly landing on what's right. So I was tutored through the Spirit, and there's a framework that I used, and it was first people, then principle, then policy, then process, and then politics. So people, principle, policy, process, and politics. And I knew that if I could focus on those first 4 in that order, the politics would take care of itself. Because when you're driven by politics, sometimes you get the cart before the horse. One time I had a colleague who came in and he shows me this picture of Florida's governor with a chainsaw in his hand, and he's out helping cut down trees during some natural disaster, probably a hurricane. And he says to me, "We need this photo of Governor Herbert." And I just bust out laughing because I was like, first of all, have you seen the governor's biceps? Like, it's not going to look like that. But second of all, this wasn't about getting a picture on the front page. We had just experienced a severe windstorm in northern Utah, and we had debris everywhere, and it had caused a lot of property damage. But the challenge was we were expecting another storm within 48 hours, and all of that debris was about to become airborne. And figuring out how to clean that up and prepare, and having the conversation and driving it back to people first. If we care about people first, what are we going to do first? First, we're going to make sure everybody's safe, and we're going to make sure everyone's aware and that they know the second storm is coming and they can do all they can. Then we're going to talk about principles and guiding principles in the governor's office. We would often step a conversation back to what principles are going to drive this issue, and then what is the good policy outcome that we want to have happen, and then what's the process that drives that. And when we did that in that order, we got to good recommendations. And in the end, the communications and media strategy evolved from that. So I'm a big believer that you don't say, well, what do we want the headline to be? You say, what do we want the outcomes to be for people, and the principles and the process, the policy and the process involved. If we can get that right, we'll know what the key messages are. We'll know what people need to hear. We'll understand better. And our communications will not only be more authentic, they'll be on point. So I found myself often persuading colleagues who had political aspirations of their own or wanted to make sure the governor got reelected, to help them understand you get reelected by governing, and you govern well by putting the right things first. And that was often my little soapbox there. Let me share with you the story about how I left the governor's office. I think it's instructive to then explain why I am where I am. 2 years into my time with the governor, my oldest daughter, Alyssa, passed on. She was a BYU art history major and had a number of health issues. I won't go into those now, but that's been a transformational experience for us. You were never the same, as you can imagine. And working the schedule I did on top of shouldering my own grief and helping my family navigate that experience, I came back from bereavement leave, and I'd taken 3 weeks off. I came back part-time at 3 weeks and kind of eased back into it. But I found myself so impatient with the conversations. And I remember sitting in a policy meeting, 25 people around the table, and just thinking, we are really worked up over stuff that really doesn't matter. I just found myself really impatient with the politics in particular. And I could feel over the next year, my lamp had been drained. I just felt so depleted. And the Spirit started to say to me, it's time to go. Your time's up. And I was resisting it because if you were to look at my performance, I was in my groove. I'd finally figured out how to do this job, and I was good at it. You know, I felt really confident that I finally knew what I was doing and how to do it, and the pieces were moving and the parts were falling together. My staff was synchronizing, and you know, I felt like I'd built capacity, and the governor and I had a great working relationship in terms of communication and understanding one another. But Spirit persisted. It's time to go. And then Lieutenant Governor Greg Bell decided he was leaving, and it was important to me to help the governor get through that period of identifying a new lieutenant governor and handling that transition and that announcement and that implementation. But I had gone into the governor and told him that I was having these feelings that maybe it was time for me to move on. And first he was mad, and then he was upset, and then there were tears, and there was screaming, and there was, you know, it wasn't pretty. And we had the conversation about 8 times, and every time it was like Groundhog's Day. I just didn't feel like I was making any progress with him. And finally, I gave him a letter of resignation with the date I was leaving, because it was clear to me that this was no longer a negotiation for the best outcome. I had to be very clear that I was leaving. And the Spirit had told me, November 22nd will be your last day. I don't normally have those kind of promptings. I have promptings about principles and guidance, but a specific date, that's a rare thing. So you pay attention to it. November 22nd will be your last day. Okay, it makes sense because that's kind of before Thanksgiving, but okay. So I put in my resignation letter that November 22nd would be my last day. And when I gave it to the governor, he was really, really angry. Giving a letter of resignation felt personal for him, and I understand that. I just needed to be crystal clear that I was leaving. And those conversations I've been trying to have about who would replace me and could we transition and overlap, I wanted to have those conversations, and they weren't happening. But when he was upset, I do remember saying, look, this has come from a higher authority, and I'm way more scared of him than I am of you. So this is the decision. Well, where will you go? I'm not really sure. I didn't have a resume. I'd never applied for a job. I'd been recruited for every position I'd had to that point. But the promptings I'd received were, it's time to go. There's something else for you to do. I'm not going to tell you what it is, because you need to rest. And there is something else for you to do. So I gave him my resignation letter. And the week after I left, the state of Utah's Kitchen v. Herbert decision on gay marriage was announced. This was prior to the national decision, and it was international news because of the nature of this state and the culture of this state. It was international news, and my staff got Thanksgiving Day off and Christmas Eve at 4 o'clock and Christmas Day off. But all the rest of those days, they were full throttle, 18-hour days. And when you're grieving the loss of a child who loves the holidays are really difficult. Everything's a trigger, and I realized Heavenly Father was protecting me and allowing me space and time to process and heal, and that He was graciously looking out for me. Within 3 weeks, I had 3 different job offers, including one that would have taken me back to the governor's office in a different capacity, and it was an interesting transition experience that I had. I had so much leave when I left the governor's office. I had 3.5 months of unused leave. So I cashed out some of it, and then I also used some of it. And it took me to, I was making this decision, and I started with the LDS Church January 20th, having left November 22nd. And the prompting to take the job with the church happened in the temple. I took that decision to the temple several times, because it was the job with the least certainty, an enormous cut in pay, no career path or trajectory or advancement path, no definition to the job. I wasn't really sure how I would fit into the culture. I didn't know enough about the organization because it was they were general in terms of the conversations, but the prompting was pretty clear. That's where I need you to go. It didn't make any sense. And they hired me to do a millennial marriage project. So we had leaders of the church who were concerned that a bunch of you aren't getting married. And moreover, more of your peers that are non-LDS didn't value marriage, right? So, Allie, go fix the American family. Here's some duct tape and a senior missionary. So, no budget, right? It was. There were a lot of people who were saying, like, "You sure this is the right career move for you?" But I went with faith, understanding that I was going to be taught and the light would come. And it turns out that I learned a lot about millennials. We didn't do the marriage initiative. What my report back to the general authorities was, guess what? They actually really value marriage. That's why they're avoiding it, because they don't want to mess it up, and they want to optimize their outcomes. So they're looking for the perfect model, and they think girlfriend 2.0 might be more compatible if they just wait for her a little longer. So that was my report back. And by the way, you could spend a whole lot of money, and this might have to do more with economic and social forces way beyond advertising or any public PR effort. That was good enough, right? Then it was on to the next thing, which was Mormon and gay and the redesign there. But I learned over time why God has sent me to the church. And my role in public affairs was a growth opportunity. There were many times I found myself in a crisis of faith, saying, what am I doing here? It wasn't clear to me. And first of all, let me be very clear. My faith is resilient and strong and fervent and real and undeniable. And I sustain those who lead us and direct us. But there are times when you can't see the intention behind the design, and you don't see what God is trying to accomplish. And there are times when you wonder, did I misunderstand that inspiration? Did I not get that right? Was I off? And about 6 months into my employment with the church, I had to wonder what I was doing there. Pardon me, I'm getting over a cold. So I found myself in the July lull when all the general authorities leave and most of the senior staff are gone, and I didn't have any vacation leave at this time. So, I've amazingly gone through all my email, I've studied everything, I've got proposals, nothing's moving. Plus, I'm just thinking generally, like, this is not really using my skill set. I don't have my testimony of our alcohol strategy. Like, what am I doing here? And when I'd pray about it, there were several promptings I got. And the first one was, just be you. You are in this place for a reason. You're here by design. And the second one was, you are here to help men and women learn to work together. And I was given a very clear impression with an image in my mind of two cupped hands, right and left, together. And the prompting was, we hold more living water together than we do separately. We hold more living water together than we do separately. So I recognized pretty quickly that there were some gender challenges in the workforce of the church. There are now, I think, 12 or 14 women that are at the director level at which I am, and there's a managing director level that's just the next level up over departments, and there are now two. One was just recently hired. There are 2 women out of 22,000 employees. So a little gender disparity. And the bigger challenge is when we did the analysis in the pipeline, there aren't a lot of women coming up through middle management. So we were trying to, there's now a workforce initiative to put more capacity in that pipeline and figure out how we help women advance and participate and prepare, which is exciting and thrilling of itself. But at the time, I would look around and think, I have no mentors, I don't have role models, and I need to figure this out. I also recruit posse members. Let me explain that. In every role I've ever had, one of the strategies I've had is to cultivate allies and advocates. And what I mean by that is an ally will sit next to you in a meeting. They will stand next to you at a press event. An advocate will speak up for you when you're not in the room. And I wanted people who were both my allies and my advocates, personally and professionally. So even when I was working for state agencies, that's what I did, cultivate allies and advocates. When I worked for the governor, the exact same thing. In the church, the same thing. and I build rapport and relationships, and I found that there are men in the organization that are so very willing to be my ally and advocate and speak for me. So I find them and recruit them to be part of my posse and help look out for me. And I have realized over time, they benefit as much from this as I do. They learn as much as I do from this professional opportunity. In public affairs, there was a point where we were redefining my role because I was frustrated with putting lipstick on pigs, to be honest. I wanted to do proactive communication and stop just doing defensive, reactive work, which is what I felt like I was doing. And it was enormously frustrating. So we were in the middle of redefining it when Communication Services posted the role I now have, which is the Director of Institutional Messaging. And we don't use the words marketing or branding in the church, but my current role is the convergence of trying to help leaders identify an institutional identity, an aspirational brand for the church. It's define our vision. Who are we and why do we exist and who are we at our best? And then let's map a strategy to get toward that. The other piece of my job is an integrated communications approach. How do we build the operational system to deploy the strategy? Otherwise, the strategy is just theory. So what processes and systems do we need in place, and what structure needs to be put in place? Historically, the church has operated in a very decentralized way. Different departments have communicated with members in their own way. So you wouldn't know this as a member, but sometimes you're getting communication from the missionary department, sometimes you're getting it from priesthood and family department, sometimes it's the correlation department, sometimes it's materials management, but you don't know because it's all coming under a church logo or a moniker, but none of that is synchronized right now. And our goal is to map for different audiences, which audience gets what content. So we've made, in the past 8 years, our content production has enormously grown. Digital publishing has made this possible, but we are not presently able to say this message went to that audience and had that outcome. So inadvertently, we have built the perfect echo chamber in that isolated audiences are getting a lot of messaging and other audiences aren't getting enough. And we're trying to figure out how to create that balance. And it's all leader-driven, and it takes time because they are the 12 at least are a traveling high council. They're on the road a lot, and they have very full platters, and it's amazing the pace that they keep up, especially given their ages. So this process takes a lot of time, but I'm so very hopeful and so very energized because I see God's plan. I see the design where certain people are in different places right now, and it's coming together. Things are happening, and good things are happening. Really good things are happening. I'm very hopeful about it, and I can see that the Lord will do His work. And we're instruments, and hopefully we don't get in the way, but the Lord will do His work. I was asked to share a day in the life of what it looks like to do my current role. I'm looking for a Kleenex. Just one second. Not so much. Sorry. Thank you, sir. Sorry to step off camera. I know you're recording this. Every day of my life is different. One day I might be at an off-site planning retreat. Another day I might be in on-site research focus groups. Like I mentioned, I just returned from India, which was fascinating. Or I might be down here on campus working with BYU on a specific issue, or managing digital assets, or just sheer documentation and trying to plan the organization, or writing ridiculous product plans. Sometimes we make the federal government's bureaucracy look like lightweights compared to what we do at church headquarters. I mentioned we have 22,000 employees over the globe. There's a bureaucracy, which it's by design. There's lots of problem solving and lots of strategic planning, both in terms of communication strategy and organizational strategy. Do a lot of collaborative and partner meetings, trying to figure out how our operations fit together, how our messages fit together. A lot of consultation. We have some special advisors and vendors that assist us. I do a lot of written reports and verbal reports and presentations, a lot of presentations. And pre-meetings and post-meetings, you should all know about this little hint. It's not just about the actual meeting, it's about the pre-meeting and the post-meeting. And women usually get left out of the pre-meeting and the post-meeting. So for the women in the room, this is like the key to success. Figure out where those are and get there. Because they're huddling beforehand to decide what happens in the meeting, and they're huddling afterward to decide what do we do now. And women come to the meeting with like notes, and they're prepared, and they're ready to have a full-on conversation, not understanding that usually the men have decided already what's going to happen in the meeting. So be part of that. And it's not just a male-female thing, but I just see the tilt every once in a while. And then partner and stakeholder rapport. There's so many partners in the community that reach out, that want to just be heard and understood. Sometimes they just want to know someone at headquarters is listening, or they have a great idea and they just want to bounce it off you. Sometimes if there's a critical issue, I will actually engage a stakeholder or a partner and pick their brain for context and even sometimes talking points. So we see there's a lot of this fluidity, this energy that gets exchanged back and forth. Key elements in my jobs was the other piece that I was asked to talk about. How did I get recruited, and why did I have those roles that I've had in different places? Number one, I'm a big believer in communication skills, that writers rise in organizations, and we don't have enough people who know how to write well, how to write in different voices for different purposes. They don't understand the difference between technical writing and persuasive writing. And if you want to rise in an organization, learn how to communicate well, both verbally and in writing. The second thing is a work ethic. I honestly feel like I have an obligation to do my very best, and I try to find things about which I can be passionate. And to be honest, when I was lobbying, I don't think I was super passionate about it because I was working for a client and their bottom line. But when I worked for the governor or in public policy or in what I do now, I care deeply about the outcomes. The other thing is my strategic planning ability. I think multidimensionally. I can think about small details, and I think about the big picture, and I have the discipline to stay on strategy, and I think that sets me apart. Because some people will mistake motion for momentum. They'll mistake all that spinning for going somewhere. And I think I know when things are really moving and how to measure that. And I also came to understand the power of my voice and learn to speak truth to power. It's been a huge blessing that I haven't had to work. I have a husband who's fully employed and great job, and so it gave me a ton of freedom to say what I needed to say, thinking, I don't need this job. I'm going to tell you what I think, because I would rather have my personal integrity. And you know what? In the end, that was the way to get advanced. And it's a paradigm that I don't think people understand or value enough. When you're cautious and you're guarded and you're not true to yourself, you're actually limiting your ability to rise in an organization. So trust your voice inside and trust yourself, and you will rise. Okay, that's enough about that. I want to share with you a segment of an address that I gave at FAIR, which is a Mormon Apologists Forum, a couple of years ago. I was asked to talk about public dialogue and what that's like. And I spoke about the transformational experience when you're a disciple in the arena and what that does. But as I was thinking about you and thinking about where you are in your lives and your journey and what I wish I would have understood and valued and appreciated when I was in my 20s, and I was starting as this just, passionate, excited campaigner for truth and righteousness, and I was going to go out there and fight all the bad guys and make sure the good guys won. I wish I would have understood this piece better, and this is part of what my career has taught me. So forgive me for reading some of this, but it's good writing. So I want to share. I'm so modest. I'm sorry. I had 4 points in the speech, but this one was people matter. So remember when I talked about that framework of people first, politics last? This is where this comes from, that people matter, and so we should see them. So often when we engage in the public arena, it's us versus them, good versus evil, right versus wrong. And we, of course, are the defenders of truth and righteousness. We must stand, we must fight, but in the public arena, it's often more complicated than that. And if you consider how often issues are framed with a polarized framework, this oversimplified model that positions people at extremes, and it makes for great reality TV or ratings-grabbing journalism. But real life and real people and real solutions are more nuanced. And I think because we understand that concept of progression as LDS saints, I think it's something we can intuit. We understand that people are progressing line upon line. And now increasingly so, I find myself so uncomfortable with overgeneralized and false dichotomies. How do we reconcile that? The rejection of a polarized framework with what Lehi teaches about opposition in the Book of Mormon. He taught for our agency to operate and for God's eternal purposes, there must be opposites. Righteousness and wickedness, holiness and misery, good and bad, life and death. Without opposites, Lehi said, all things must needs be a compound in one, wherefore it must needs have been created for a thing of naught. Wherefore there would have been no purpose in the end in its creation. Wherefore this thing must needs destroy the wisdom of God and his eternal purposes. Sounds like opposites are kind of important. So central to our plan of happiness is the concept of polar opposites that we then may use our agency to act for ourselves and receive the punishment of the happiness which is affixed. But it's incumbent upon us as a higher use of our moral agency to understand a situation in its entirety, at least as much as we can, and to resist oversimplification and to accurately assess good and evil. And Lehi points out some binary frameworks are indeed helpful. But note that his frameworks, good and evil, life and death, charity and selfishness, virtue and debauchery, they all refer to attributes. They refer to behavior, but they do not refer to people. Indeed, in the public arena, in the greater conversation about what is good and what is not, dualities that refer to people, binaries that polarize people, are not only counterproductive, they can even be destructive. And so today I'm inviting you to resist placing people in this polarized duality and instead consider a faith-centered framework of complementarity, where each component is part of a greater whole as interdependent entities. Female and male, Democrat and Republican, LGBTQ and straight, Christian and Muslim, active and less active, black and white, Israeli and Palestinian, Batman and Superman. They're all part of a complementary whole. The tension in these overgeneralizations is often that in the public arena and in everyday conversations, these dualities get framed as polar and oppositional. And there are those who benefit from oppositional positioning, those who profit financially or politically by perpetuating attention and misunderstanding. Sometimes I call them poverty pimps or morality pimps. Not here, of course. I wouldn't say that word. Moreover, descriptions of dialogue between or about oppositional dualities are frequently reduced to these caricatures or stereotypes because, after all, isn't it just so much easier to dislike a caricature or an avatar or a pseudonym? But instead, what might happen if those dualities were framed as complementary or independent, that each were this unique part of a greater whole, a part of the total and ultimate solution? And we know Americans are becoming more divided along ideological lines, and partisan hostility is running high, and people are getting unfriended on Facebook. So I'm asking an earnest question right now, and it's, are we hyper-polarized in our rhetoric, not only as a nation, but as a people of faith? And are human beings routinely divided along some line? Do we allow a victim vocabulary to frame a situation, or do we recognize this battlefield vernacular in the way we talk about issues? Do we label people as evil just because they see things differently? And have we inadvertently turned every issue and every conversation into the zero-sum game where we're all going to lose? And it's not always us versus them. And are we asking ourselves who the real enemy is? After all, is it not the father of lies who benefits most from the contention between God's children? The same people and children for whom Jesus Christ paid the ultimate debt. So can we not see the people and resist the poles? Let me just leave you with this. We have a great deal in common as human beings, and there's often more to and about a person across the table than you can possibly understand. And C.S. Lewis once wrote, "There are no ordinary people. You've never talked to a mere mortal." That assumption where the other person has pernicious mortal motives has to be substituted with a desire to see another's eternal potential through the loving eyes of heavenly parents. We must see with spiritual eyes and hear with spiritual ears. and we'll get a better sense of another's individual identity. There are times when I have prayed, Father, help me see them through thine eyes. Help me see them through that. You love them. Sister Marriott referred to this in our last general conference talk. You love them too. You love them. So there must be something redeeming about them. Help me see them through thy eyes and what they offer toward this ultimate outcome. Because there's no accident that we're all in this arena at this time, in this place. No one is here by accident. So no matter their lens or their present place on earth, everyone has infinite value. And it is up to us in the public arena to see that and to value that and to see it as part of the solution. Because it's not about the outcome. Sometimes it's more about the process. We are transformed by that process when we engage as disciples. And we become more Christ-like when we live as disciples and practice the things we've covenanted in the arena. Let me leave you that witness that I have seen that over and over again. It's not the easy road, but it's the better road. Sometimes it takes more time, but sometimes slow is fast. And sometimes endings are beginnings. And I leave you that witness in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen. Okay, I guess we have some time for questions.
We do.
Okay.
Let me encourage you to come to the microphone. And I'd like to encourage, we often have, we don't have enough of the women in the class ask questions. So let me just put that out in the air and say, get to the microphone and ask a question. Would you?
Thanks.
Okay. I hate to even, that was so awesome. I hate to even have questions at this point.
Oh,
we're gonna take
I'm
some.
happy to answer some. Yeah. If I can, unless you've all learned it all already. Okay. Hi.
Hi. Okay. Do you ever get tired? That's my whole question.
I'm perpetually tired. Ask my husband. I'm aging in dog years. I'm so tired. I used to tease the governor that I was going to file a workers' comp claim for a massage and Botox because I was so tired. Yeah, I'm tired, but we're told to wear our lives out. I'm learning better balance, though. I'm actually giving a speech in a couple of weeks to the Women in Business Conference in Davis County at their chamber to talk about this because I've had to learn to breathe a little bit. In my 20s, it was not uncommon for me to stay up at least one night, all night. Emma Lou Thane, great poetess in LDS tradition, would do this because it was my sacred time. I'm kind of a night owl. Like at 9 o'clock, my brain is on. And I'm not married to one. He's farm boy up at dawn, right? So, yeah, we're opposites. So he's in bed, and I'm like, okay, it's quiet. I got stuff to do. I love to write when it's quiet, and I can't do that anymore. But I have to make myself go to bed and get the rest, and I don't sleep nearly enough. But I also find myself super invigorated when I see the solutions come together. So I've learned that process, but I do more meditating and pondering than I've ever done before. This year, for my birthday, I negotiated a 3-day silent retreat where I rented a place over a garage at a cabin at Sundance. A place over a garage sounds kind of like college, but it wasn't. It was beautiful, airy, lots of big windows and light, and the best mattress and comforter and pillows and towels, and 2 decks by the creek, so I could do yoga at sunrise, and I walk through the woods. And at first when I proposed it, Eric's like, we're not going to talk to each other, and I'm like, you're not going. This is me. I went by myself. I did my own, Thoreau and Walden thing, and Heavenly Father guided me. He said, these days are gifts for you, so I was given what I was to do on days 1, 2, and 3, and I journaled 50 pages. I read 2 books, and I just decompressed. I ate when I was hungry. I slept till I woke up, and I realized how much sleep I need is about 7 hours a night, and I don't have to eat so much. I stress eat a ton. Oh, chocolate is my weakness. Dark chocolate, hazelnut with So, but I also realized I have to take care of me too and recharge. So I'm doing better at that. I think I go to the temple way more often and just spend a lot of quiet time. And I have David White's one of my favorite poets, and I listen to him on audio because he says things like it's extraordinary in his British accent, and it just calms me down. So I don't listen to the media as much as I used to when I worked for the governor. Thank heavens, because talk about distortion, right, of reality. And I just try to decompress more.
Okay.
Did my husband pay you to ask that question?
No. I was
Okay.
just wondering because I feel tired all the time. And I'm like, wow, she does 10 times more things than me.
No,
So
I'm
thank you.
tired, perpetually tired. But life is short, right? So
Thank you.
If you can figure it out, let me know. Okay, any other questions?
So I'm interested in the advice you had specifically for women. And so I'm just wondering, what's your biggest piece of advice for women in the workplace and also in the church?
Let me take those two questions separately. For women in the workplace, I would say speak up, stand up, lift up. Don't be held back by the fact that you're a woman. Like, just do what you're good at, and let go of that gender chip on your shoulder. Although, don't shut up and put up. Like, call it out when stuff is wrong. For women in the church, understand the doctrine, understand the theology, deep dive, understand it. Don't take pablum, don't eat frosting. Like, go for the real stuff and understand it, because God has not sent you by accident, and He doesn't. You're not a second-rate citizen in this kingdom, and we may not have the vernacular right now. We don't have the lexicon to fully explain a woman's role in the gospel, because we've defaulted to these convenient stereotypes. And we have to find a way to talk about a woman's role in the church and the power of the priesthood and what that looks like in a woman's life, and the power of covenant. And we need women of strength and women of faith who aren't blown about by every wind of change and every wind of skepticism and doubt. And doubt is not a faith crisis. Doubt is a learning process, right? It's an opportunity. And in conflict, there are opportunities for growth, always, always. So that would be my advice for women. Don't stop studying. Don't put things on shelves. Like, keep asking. God will guide you. The Spirit will guide you. The Spirit's been the biggest mentor I've had in my life. Customized instruction. Okay.
So you talked about how differences in beliefs and in values can complement each other. And I know that back in, I think it was 2011, Elder Oaks gave a talk about truth and tolerance, and it's interesting because he doesn't really say that they're reconcilable, but he talks about how, acknowledging these two different competing values, we can make educated, practical decisions, and uses a couple examples of living with a roommate who swears, or et cetera. How would you, but that's very practical. You as an expert of messaging, how would you advise us as we go into the world writing blogs or writing essays? How do we exercise both truth, what we know to be true, and also be tolerant in our messaging?
That's such a great question, because let me share what I learned in India, just a little bit of learning. I learned a lot, but there's one key thing. So we're studying attitudes and beliefs about religion and culture, and we start these focus groups or in-depth interviews with a question: what is a good person to you? What does that look like to you? And it has some follow-up questions, and one of those follow-up questions is a religious person a good person? Or is a spiritual person a good person? And we all know what religion means in our context. In India, it's different. Instead of being a sectarian community association, it's more of a cultural heritage identifier. You're born into it. It's who you are. It's part of your identity. You don't choose it. You don't change it. You don't share it. It is what it is, right? So when you say, is a religious person a good person, that's like saying, is a black person a good person? And they look at you like, what kind of question is that? We have to realize when we talk about our faith, words are placeholders for meaning, and words have different meaning in different contexts. So when we start talking about our faith and our beliefs, we need to know to whom we're speaking. So the best thing you can do is know your audience. What do they value? What do they see? And meet them where they are and start to explain your faith in accessible terminology to them. And we're so good at cliches in our faith tradition. If you think about testimony meeting and what people say, and when we bring consultants who aren't LDS to our worship services to see what that experience is like, they're like, it's like you're speaking a whole nother language, because we have this subtext in our culture. And I honestly believe some of the judgment, the shame, the alienation, the marginalization that happens in that subtext that's not aligned with Christian doctrine at all is chasing people away. It's repelling people who normally would be attracted, and it's actually causing us to lose some of our youth because they're saying, that doesn't line up with what you're teaching me about Jesus. That doesn't feel right. We have to find a better way to talk about our faith. And the Spirit will witness, and we have to honor agency and the power of the Spirit. That same Spirit that witnessed to Joseph in the grove and witnesses to you and me will witness to that other person if the words are true. So let's not use words that alienate and divide and scare them away or feel judgmental, but let's find a way to connect to where they are and speak about our faith in accessible ways. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, you're welcome.
You had talked about allies and advocates. I want to understand a little bit more about it. It's been a topic of conversation I've been in. What were the hallmarks of those individuals? How did they become accessible to you? And what is it about them that made you want to bring them into your posse?
Okay. First of all, they're just nice people. They don't want to pick a fight. Sometimes allies and advocates, sometimes I like a challenge. So it might be that the person who seems least persuadable, I see them and I think, you're going to be my best friend. You know, I'm going to sit next to you. We're going to warm up. We're going to start slow. I'm going to take you to lunch. We're going to explain. I'm going to get to know who you are and what makes you tick and understand more about your perspective and your needs and agendas. And it used to be that I would be terrified of speaking to somebody who had what I perceived as a polar opposite viewpoint. And what I've learned is when you start to know them and you start to understand what motivates their issue positions, you can actually start to find middle ground. You can understand their motives better. So I look for people who I think I can work with. And there are people who are some of my closest friends with whom I totally disagree on public policy issues. And I don't understand how they can be in that place and think that those solutions are viable. But at the same time, I know them as people, and I adore their passion, their conviction. I respect the experiences they've had and the challenges they've overcome. And I realize I can learn so much from them. And maybe my position's not right. Maybe I have something to learn. So I often just try to find out where they are and why they're there in that place in their life, and then start to help them understand me and who I am and what I'm about. And sometimes they just come out of the woodwork. There was one day in particular, I had, in public affairs, I officed in the Joseph Smith Memorial Building, which is adjacent to the Main Street Plaza, which is adjacent to the Salt Lake Temple. So I had a fantastic view out my window of the Main Street Plaza and the temple. And especially on really hard days and at hard times, I would look out that window. And one day, I was looking out that window and sort of thinking, why am I here? And out of the blue, I get a call from the head of HR, 22,000 employees, and the head of HR, who'd had a conversation with me at a different point in my time at church headquarters, just calls me to check on me. And that day, I was saying, Ben, I'm kind of having some collisions with the culture. I'm not really sure I can be effective here. I'm not really sure I can make a difference here. And he gave me a pep talk, and he said, just be you. Just be you. Be who you are. We need you here. We need your voice. Don't change a thing. Because I was trying to say, give me some guidance on how to navigate this. And he was saying, just be you. And I think that's part of cultivating allies and advocates is being authentic and being the real you and being accessible and even vulnerable sometimes, but being who you are. And you find middle ground. But you have to be pretty intentional about it. It doesn't just happen by accident. Okay? Yeah. Any other questions?
Maybe time for one more, but we might be done.
Okay.
Okay.
Thanks so much. What a treat to be with all of you. Good luck. Thanks.